Hello my dear students, I'm Mr. Hamad, the art teacher. Today we will discuss the third unit, which is form. Form is related to shapes, and we cannot create any sort of form without creating a shape at first. So we will try remembering the basic steps toward creating a simple shape. So we basically start from a point to a line, and then another line, and another one, and then closing the shape. So we basically have a shape now. And then if you remember, creating a circle, which is much easier, and then a triangle becoming a shape, and then a rectangle. It's very easy, not complicated. You only have to connect the lines to each other. So each of these shapes has a specific name. So this one is a square, as we all know it, and this is a triangle, and this one is a circle, and this is a rectangle. You may ask why some of them end with an angle, right? Because basically each shape has an angle to it. They are geometric shapes, and geometric shapes has angles. So when we are done with the 2D shapes, we can go to the 3D shapes. So creating a shape, and then it becomes a form by adding a value or depth to it. So the square becomes a cube, and the triangle becomes a pyramid, and the circle can become a cylinder, and the rectangle can become a prism. These are all the types of geometrical forms, and we have many and many. They are all man creation. There is cylinder, sphere, torus, cube, cuboid, all of them. But we will focus on focus on like cone, cylinder, sphere, and cube, and the square pyramid. There are two types of form. There is organic form, and there is geometric form. And if you can see in the organic form section, these are things we find in nature. They are organic and natural, God-made. God made these kind of forms, shapes, life, and creation. And in the quite opposite, the geometric form are man-made, but God-given objects and elements. We cannot create anything based off nowhere. God provided these stuff for us, and then the human took them and created a geometric form based on their liking. Now we will discuss the dimensions. The dimensions are very easy, and we have to know the three types of dimensions. In a 3D figure only, in only 3D, the 3 dimension, the D refers to the dimension, 3D, the D refers to a dimension. Okay, must have height, length, and depth. These are the essentials of having a 3 dimension. But talking to a first dimension, the second dimension, let's see here in this reference photo. This one says 2 dimension. Why? Because it has only height and length, and in 1 dimension it only has either a length or a height. Okay, either one. 0 dimension has nothing. It's just like a simple dot, or it's unstable dot. In 3rd dimension, as we said, it has depth besides the height and length. So it becomes 3 dimension, and this is 2 dimension, and this is 1 dimension, and this is 0 dimension. It has no dimensions. Look at this, 2-dimensional shape, and this is 3-dimensional shape. Now we will discuss the value scale, which is very important and necessary to tell the difference between each shade or tone and tint. We always start the value scale with the darkest shade to the lightest one. Look, this is number 1. This is the darkest. Number 2 is much lighter than number 1. Number 3 is much lighter than number 2. And the same. 4 is lighter than number 3. 5 is lighter than 4. And 6 and 7 and 8. 9 is somehow barely visible. Sometimes can be white and sometimes can be very light gray. In the exercise sheet, you have to duplicate the value scale. You have to duplicate the value scale. You have to create using a pencil, duplicating the value scales, starting with the darkest shade, using the tip of your pencil and little bit pressing hard on the paper so you can get the darkest shade. And then you can go to the number 2, which is much lighter than number 1. It's a very simple task. It can give you a practice and get your hand used to the motion, to the strokes, hatching and cross hatching. We will get later in the texture section. So this exercise sheet will be included in the Google Classroom. Every exercise sheet will be included there. You can do it after the lessons finished. So it becomes much easier for you to do it. So as we were saying, shade is basically the first 3 or 2 darks values. So this 2 or 3 can be the shade part. And tone starts from number 3 or 4 to number 7 or 6. And the tint can somehow be number 8 or 9. More usually to number 9 itself or number 8 sometimes, based on the value scale that you applicate on the paper. This is shade, this is tone, and this is tint. Similarly to this one, we have to create, not using squares. This is only for learning. The dividing here is for you to learn the numbers. But here you can applicate it without the numbers by only pressing hard at first. And then you can lightly and slightly move the tip of the pencil. And here you can easily create it without the squares by only using your hand motion, slightly removing the pencil whenever you get near the number 9 or 8. So you will create the value scale by yourself. Here is the same thing we discussed about, which I will also include it in the Google Classroom as an activity and exercise. Number 1, 2, we said number 1 is the darkest tone, number 2 is much lighter than number 1, and 3 the same. Then starting from barely number 3, 4, 5, 6 is the tone, which is gray, much lighter gray, and then 8 and 9, which are the tint, tone, and these are the shade. Light source is very important, as well as the value scale. By indicating the light source, we can indicate the shadow. There are always these elements you must know when having an object that is near any light source, whether it was sun or normal light. Let's indicate the light part, which is here. This is the lightest part or the lightest color in this object. And here is the darkest, or the where the shadow is, and this one is the mid-tone. You can see this is the midtone, the middle part. So we can say that the sun is here and it's hitting the object here. The next one, this is a sphere. We can tell by the light color here, right, that the sun is from here, or any light source is hitting here, and this is the shadow part. This is the shadow part, and this is the midtone, the middle part. This exercise will be included also in the Google Classroom as all the other exercises. In this handout, we must know the elements that can control or contribute to the light source. So this area is called highlight because the light source is hitting this area and we call it a highlight. Midtone, as I mentioned before, it's the middle tone between the highlight and the core shadow, or the shadow, the dark part, okay? So this is also the core shadow. Never mind the reflected highlight. We will not discuss about it because it's a bit complicated. This is called the core shadow, which is the darkest part in the object. And this is called the cast shadow, the shadow that follows an object. Here's the same. The highlight is hitting this area, okay? And the midtone is the middle part between the dark side of the object, this one, the core shadow. This is also a midtone because it's a mixture between the core shadow and the highlight part, right? Can you see it? And this is the cast shadow, as I mentioned before, the shadow that follows an object. As this one, this is the highlighted section here, and this is the midtone, that is the mixture between the dark side of the shadow of an object, and this is the cast shadow that follows an object. Here's the same. This is the midtone. This is the midtone. This is the highlighted area, the much lighter area, and this is the core shadow. This is the darkest part of an object, and the cast shadow that follows an object. This is a simple exercise, so get to know the techniques and textures that are applicable to an object. Let's say this one. Here we can use the cross hatching to make the shape have more depth to it. And this exercise will be also uploaded in the Google Classroom, as you can for the students and let them learn and just have fun with the exercise. Here we'll use the stippling motion to give the shape a little bit of depth. We can use colors, we can use the gray tones, as I mentioned before. And in the last one, we'll use scribbling. Scribbling, that is freestyling. It doesn't have to go in any other way. It's just scribbles. As I mentioned before, giving an object a value or lightness or darkness, even in colors or the gray tones, we have to know the techniques. The first technique that I mentioned before, the hatch, that uses the lines. Cross hatching, similarly the same, to hatch but crossing the lines. Stippling, as I mentioned before, using your motion to stipple. Marks is just leaving your marks on the object, and blending using a tissue, or you can use your thumbs, your fingers to blend. If you have any question on this unit 3, which is form, you may ask me in Google Classroom. I will happily just answer any question that you don't understand. If you request a private meeting, I will absolutely do it at any time. If you don't understand any part, you can ask me through the application. As I said, I will be happy to do it for you. And every exercise will be uploaded, and all the exercise sheet will be uploaded in the Google Classroom. If you have any question related to that, you may feel free to ask anything.